and the sword that once carved my path to hell will guard the pilgrim's way.
All right, everybody, welcome again to a Road Crusades History live stream. So, everybody has watched episode number 2 of the epic Knights Templar television series on the History Channel, KnightFall. And now we are here to give you our infallible opinions on it and explain to everybody what is historically accurate about it, what's historically inaccurate about it, and what we liked, what we didn't like, and other. And explain to everybody. Oh, whoops! Of course I did this. Okay, and I have now muted my YouTube feed, so that's probably good. Okay. So this is J. Stephen Roberts here, and I'm joined, of course, by my good friends Rand Brown. Rand, how are you, sir?
Not bad.
All right, and if anybody else has the YouTube feed on, please make sure you mute that on if you're watching the chat and you've got the YouTube feed playing. And I've also got my good buddy, Mr. Scott Amos. Scott, how you doing, sir?
Can't complain.
All right, and we're very excited to have back one of our favorite special guests, Mr. Paul Copenhagen. Paul, how you doing?
Doing really well. Glad to be back.
So it's going to be good having Paul here because, well, Paul is very well versed in the Knights Templar. So I think we got somebody good here to help us out as we unpack the second episode here. So, all right, so episode number 2. I guess I'll launch into a few comments here. Yeah, first of all, I'm just going to say that I am having fun with it. I don't want to be a stick in the mud or anything. It's kind of a fun show. It's kind of a fun drama, I guess, and I do enjoy getting to see the Templars kind of kick some rear end and stuff. But I will say this. One thing I kept thinking as I was watching episode 2 was this could easily not have anything to do with the Templars at all. Like, this could kind of just be any medieval or fantasy-esque story, and they've just kind of tacked the Templars onto it. And I kind of wonder if that's the direction we're going to be going in general with the show. The first episode had a little bit more Templar sort of themes. It kind of dived into the whole issue of the Holy Land and, the sort of identity crisis of the Templars. And this one's just kind of, we've got this character Landry, and he's the main character, obviously. And he's kind of just I don't know, like, he very quickly has kind of lost any Templar sort of trappings about him. He's kind of just your standard sword-wielding action hero. I mean, what do you think, guys? Am I right? I'm gonna ask Paul. Paul's our special guest. I'm gonna go to Paul first. What do you think, Paul?
Landry, he strikes me as that sort of sword-wielding, random warrior. The only thing that I will say is they, at the very, very end, they are cutting into the body there, and Pope Boniface VIII is saying, if they might have swallowed something, go ahead and cut into it. And he's the first person, Landry is the first person to actually speak up and say, no, we're no better than, they are, if, the highwaymen that are obviously hired by somebody. We're no better than they are if we're going to desecrate the body. I mean, the concept of the solidity of the body and the inviolable nature of the body, even after death, was something that was fairly well maintained, even up through into the Victorian era. I mean, that's why you have grave robbers that make a killing on the black market of looting corpses and things like that to supply medical colleges. And the same thing applies here. So Landry, I was a little glad to see that they brought that up. But earlier on in the episode where Parsifal is lamenting his murder out of revenge, or his killing of of Roland out of revenge, or the highwayman there. where he's lamenting it, Landry's like, yeah, no big deal. And so I think they are stripping away a lot of the godliness, the monastic side of the Templars, especially the post-Crusade Templars. The Templars who have perhaps left the Holy Land or have never seen the Holy Land. There seems to be a lot of that, like stripping that away, at least from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, and let's just clarify real quick, the idea that the dissection of corpses was banned by the medieval church, that's definitely not true. And I know that's not what you were saying, Paul, but I just want to kind of make sure that's clear, because I know that's kind of
yeah. And I mean, like, even today, I mean, like, it's not it wasn't banned by the medieval church, but it is certainly a social taboo. I mean, like, even
the desecration
today,
of the corpse. Yeah,
the desecration of the corpse, and what
like
would
he's
be
saying,
seen as a desecration. And I mean, he even calls it a desecration when he runs in on the highwayman doing it. I mean, it's because this is somebody who's the body belongs to the order, and it's more of I got the sense in that it was more of a this is my dad, like that was really the reaction, and they were trying to play it off as a Christian thing, but I don't know that really came across very well. There's a social taboo there, of course, but I mean, it's one of those things where they tried to navigate it, and I think they muddied that water a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that is one thing that I do think does tend to come through in the show, is this idea of the brotherhood of the Templars, like this sense that they are, they have this special kind of, monkish kind of brotherly bond. And yeah, I agree with you, Paul, that kind of some of the monastic quality of sort of their character is kind of downplayed. We don't really get that vibe, but anyway, so I want to turn to Scott and Rand now. I don't know which of you wants to go next, but what were some of you guys' initial thoughts?
Well, you know me. You know me so far.
I know you loved the show, Rand. I know it.
Oh, I will totally be the stick in the mud with this crowd. I mean, especially historically. I mean, this is the show. Just if last episode it was steering the train of historical accuracy in all sorts of bizarre directions. This time it just completely derailed, and it crashed in a fireball, and it's just gone. It's pure fantasy now. It's just pure fiction. One of the biggest issues I had was with the introduction of the character of Pope Boniface VIII, who historically, at this time, if we take the show's historical timeline that they've given, which the current episodes are taking place in the year 1306, Pope Boniface VIII had been dead for 3 years. The historical Pope Boniface VIII died in 1303, and was not well loved by King Philip of France, as portrayed in the show. He and Philippe had a very contentious relationship, and de Nogaret, the king's scheming counselor, and I guess in the show resident creepy uncle, was notorious for having in public slapped Boniface VIII in the face at a public council during a debate over papal power versus royal power, and de Nogaret kind of became notorious all over Europe for that incident. So this very gentle, sort of Littlefinger-esque, sort of gentle scheming, and tete-a-tete that you see going on in the show, that was not the historical relationship between Pope Boniface VIII and the royal court of France. It was much more openly antagonistic. So there's just a lot of things going on here that historically would not it's not even, it's not history anymore. It's just pure fiction, and they're just using the trappings of history, I guess, as they will.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that the actual historical figures they're using here had far bigger personalities, I feel like, than what we're kind of getting somewhat bland characters. Like somebody like Boniface VIII. I think he was one of Dante's popes that's in hell or something, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and then de Nogaret actually came up with a plan to capture Boniface
Mhm.
VIII. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, think about that. That would make it an interesting plot point for a TV series. This kind of upstart, new made man in the Kingdom of France kidnaps the Pope, and I think what happened was, like, he wanted to execute the Pope or something, and what happened was that the local townspeople, wherever they
Yeah.
were, stopped de Nogaret, like kind of like
Yep.
upended his scheme and took the side of the Pope, which that's what sort of the average people in Christendom are gonna do.
Yeah,
And then
de Nogaret was notorious for being like, he had a reputation of just being incredibly ballsy. Like, I mean, he
and
when
no
it came
respect for the
to,
traditional order either.
and absolutely none. And when it came to uh, expanding and consolidating the royal power of the French crown, over every and any aspect that he could, he would literally stop at nothing. Um, and he made enemies of perhaps some of the most powerful people in Christendom, and yet during his lifetime they were powerless against him. Like, he was unstoppable. So yeah, the fact that they even portrayed de Nogaret as kind of this kind of mincing Weasley, creepy uncle,
A very
is
very underwhelming personality. I mean, it's just,
very, very underwhelming.
yeah.
It's very disappointing. It's I would envision him being way more along the lines of kind of a
Bombastic type figure.
yeah,
Somebody
very,
who would have
very.
commanded a presence in a room. I mean,
Exactly. I'm unfortunately I'm coming short. I'm not really finding an equivalent. But
well, I think
um,
it's just almost like, yeah, I'm not going to say that he was like Bohemond. Bohemond was
oh,
a very,
no, because that is at his core. I think he kind of still was a coward.
right.
Who hid behind the power of the state. To make his schemes happen. Um, but yeah, is somebody having microphone trouble?
Yeah, I think we're getting some noise. I think it's coming from your headset, Paul.
There's some popping.
Yeah, I think, Paul, when you might need to mute yourself when you're not talking, as we're getting a little popping and stuff from you. But anyway, so yeah, just some good points from everybody so far. Some good opening points. But I was just going to say that I've always thought of de Nogaret as somebody who maybe would have a kind of larger than life quality to him, maybe like somebody like Bohemond.
He kind of strikes me. He kind of strikes me when I read when I read the accounts of him and whatnot. He kind of strikes me as like a maybe like a Mussolini type character who very good at sort of manipulating the power of the state and also sort of popular appeal, or popular sentiment, to his own advantage, and things like that. So, but at the end of the day, not the kind of guy who's going to like physically put himself on the line for anything. That's for other people to do.
Right.
And
he didn't have that traditional, like, sort of chivalric viewpoint.
No, and
he despised that.
It's funny you bring that up, because actually de Nogaret was despised and was loathed by the aristocracy of
Right.
France,
Yeah.
by the knightly nobility of France. They absolutely despised him. and they were constantly trying to find ways to tear him down and remove him from the spot that he was at. And ultimately they failed. De Nogaret ended up dying of far more mundane causes.
Yeah.
So,
because basically, and again, this kind of gets back to problems we have with the way these people are being portrayed. Philip IV was such a driven king, and he was a king who had the goal of pretty much eliminating all of the traditional, roles of the aristocracy and just having an absolute monarchy. And De Nogaret was totally in line with that, and they were pretty much, on the same page. So kind of the portrayal we've got of Philip IV, where he's kind of this sort of dreamy kind of, he's cuckold, he's just kind of weak. I mean, it's ridiculous. It doesn't work.
And very very unstable. That one dialogue with Isabella where he's like all nice, and then all of a sudden like snaps, and he's like he snaps at her and like that. It was like, okay, so is this guy like bipolar? Is he like this is bizarre? Like, and some of it I think just comes from just the overall poor, which we've talked ad nauseum about this, so I'm not going to beat it too much, but just the poor writing on the show. Like the production quality of the show is in my attitude, it's very subpar.
Yeah.
And
so that's some good opening lines. So Scott, how about you? Did you have any initial thoughts about the show?
Well, pretty much what ran, we're 2 popes behind, and I just don't see any reason why they would use the name Boniface VIII rather than Clement V. I mean, it's just,
especially
I don't even understand that and how they could get that wrong. And then another thing I noticed was that, Isabella, the daughter Isabella, was, married to
Edward II.
Edward II, Longshank's son.
And she would have already been
married. Nothing about Catalonia anywhere in her history.
Well, actually, if this show is currently taking place in 1306, which according to the show's math it is, she married, I believe she married Edward II in 1308.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and there actually was papal involvement in the negotiations of her marriage, which when I saw that, it was like it's like they get some things right with the history, but then like everything else around it is wrong.
But then they once again they just chose to ignore a fact, and I don't know. I guess it plays into the story later on in some way, but I mean they just just like with the Pope, I mean, it's just completely wrong.
Yeah, what did you guys think of this whole Kingdom of Catalonia thing? Like that, really threw me for a loop. I was like, Kingdom of...
I can't comment on that because I really don't know enough about that area of.
Well, it was part of the Kingdom of Aragon.
Right.
Catalonia has always been a part of the Kingdom of Aragon. In fact, to this day, Catalonia's flag is essentially a modification of the original arms of the Kingdom of Aragon.
Well, were they a client state of?
No. They were just a region within Aragon.
A region within.
Originally, they were an independent county. Like what happened was. After Alfonso I of Aragon died, he died without any heirs, and his brother married the daughter, I believe it was, of the Count of Barcelona. And at that point, the Crown of Aragon was united with the County of Barcelona. In fact, for a while, they called the kings of Aragon, they called them Count Kings because they were both the Count of Barcelona and the King of Aragon. But once we get to this point, I mean, Catalonia is essentially a region within the Kingdom of Aragon, like just like you guys are pointing out. So it's
it'd be like somebody calling the Kingdom of France the Kingdom of Toulouse or the Kingdom of Provence. Like Catalonia was a region within
Okay.
Aragon. Like
And
it was, you know,
And that it wouldn't have been in a position to.
well, you know, I mean, the Aragonese may have been in a position to, you know, try to get a royal marriage with
Right.
the Kingdom of France, but as
But
far
not as an equal principality, not as a principality or a kingdom. I mean, as a
well, you know,
well, like England.
it was a kingdom. I mean, it was
Yeah.
definitely one of the big players.
And the Aragonese and the French did have a very involved history with one another, especially like during the Albigensian Crusades and things like that. They had a lot of interaction, most of it hostile. But yeah, what was funny also was that first off, there's absolutely no historical record whatsoever that the Kingdom of Aragon or Catalonia, whatever, was ever even involved with Isabella's hand.
Now that's what
there's no record whatsoever. In fact, I'm not even sure if a Prince Louise is even a real.
Yeah, I have no idea what
Like,
that is.
I mean, her marriage to Edward II was a pretty much straight through deal.
That was something. Yeah, that was something that her betrothal to Edward II, who was the first Prince of Wales that there ever was. Her betrothal to him had been arranged, had been broached by his father, Edward I, Edward Longshanks, as early as 1299.
Okay.
So that was something that was like long in the works, especially with Edward I.
Now I think they did allude to that.
It kind of, but even then they got it all wrong. Like it was, you know,
it was just an allusion.
Him offering to
vague allusion
for her hand. Well, no, that's actually the whole reason he was trying to betroth her to his son, was to keep the English holdings in the Guyenne and Gascony and the southwest of France, the old the remnants of the old Plantagenet holdings. So even then the history was all just completely ass backwards. But
yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and turn again to our guest Paul here. So Paul, what are your thoughts on the whole thing with the Pope and the Holy Grail? Like the Pope is trying to get the Holy Grail back, and the Templars are, there's some subplot going on with the search for the Holy Grail. What do you think of all that? Is Paul still with us? Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Paul. Great. All right. So the Templars find something in the Holy Land. You know what it is. Who knows? What is it? Was it gold? Was it treasures? No one knows. They find something when they're given the land that was the Second Temple.
Paul, come on! It was the copy of the Declaration of Independence given by
given to them by Nicolas Cage, right?
I think didn't the reptilian the reptilian overlords gave a copy of the Constitution to the Templars.
Right. Come on now.
I mean, I'm pretty
right. I'm pretty sure that was on Ancient Aliens.
Maybe it was.
They find something. I mean, they find something when it comes to their eventual trial. Actually, they're actually accused of having the head of John the Baptist that speaks to them. They're accused of having the Holy Grail. They're accused of, having some sort of cat that they found down there that speaks to them and is actually a familiar of the devil. At any given time, based on the charges, they're accused of having all kinds of different weird things. But the Holy Grail is probably one of the most popular beliefs, that they had the Holy Grail. Story-wise, is it fun to have this? Yeah, it is. Was Pope Boniface VIII at all sitting there hungrily waiting for the Holy Grail because the Templars had it and they knew where it was? No, not at all. I don't think that the Templars had the Holy Grail. I don't think that the Pope was hungry for it. I think it makes great television and a good story, but that's about it. But as Rand has been pointing out, good story and good history are not necessarily the same thing. So I think that the introduction of Pope Boniface VIII, the 3 years dead, is adding him in there, and this is kind of just going back to what was discussed a little bit before. I think the reason that he's there and he's kind of conspiring with the Templars and everything like that, if I was the story crafter here, and I'll make a small prediction so somebody can quote me and then tell me I'm completely wrong, or tell me, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. If I was the story writer behind KnightFall, I would set up Boniface VIII as a sympathetic character that's supportive of the Templars, that really wants what's best for the church and the Knights Templars, only to have the rug pulled out from underneath them by Clement V, who is Bertrand de Gault, is the French Pope that starts the Avignon papacy and oversees their trial and downfall at the end.
Now we don't know what's gonna. Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Paul. I didn't mean to.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. I mean,
No,
we don't know what's
saying
going to happen, but
that went through my mind too. That could very well happen in a future episode, that we change popes.
yeah. And honestly, I when I saw de Nogaret, negotiating with his little hired thug there, I thought, oh wow, I had forgotten that, I'd forgotten the dates for a moment, because I was like, oh okay, 1306. All right, well, all right, this should be working. This should work. I forgot the dates a little bit, so I'm thankful that Rand actually pointed that out. And when I went and looked, I was like, wait a minute here, there's something wrong. I looked it up because I made little notes before the episode here, but I thought, oh okay, they're actually going to show the beating that winds up killing Boniface VIII, and then he walks into the royal feast, and I was like, wait a minute, he's looking too healthy to have been beaten up and run home and die, and years, like a months later. So it was very interesting to see that, and I think with the added incentive behind the story, moving forward, of let's find the Grail, let's get the Grail. I think the whole thing is setting up the two camps, just story wise, but it makes for a very good story.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think, I know what you're saying about sort of dramatic license and stuff, Paul. I personally think that if they had stuck closer to the actual history, it could have been quite a bit more interesting.
I agree.
I don't know. I just, I look at this whole thing with and like you said, Paul, they might bring in the whole aspect of the Avignon papacy, but the way that all kind of came about is pretty intense. And I think for that to really be done correctly, they would have to have Philip IV more the way he actually was, which was this very driven, but then, like Rand mentioned last time, very weirdly like statue-like personality. Like he was an incredibly ambitious guy, but he had kind of this inhuman kind of coldness to him, which so I don't know, but so yeah, we've got the whole thing with Pope Boniface, and the subplot for I honestly find the whole, I guess it's not really even a subplot, it's kind of the actual plot of the story, which is this idea that, okay, this original sort of chapter, I guess he's the local master, the master of the house at Paris or something, Godfrey, he gets murdered, and we're not really sure who murdered him. It's these guys who are trying to find something, or they're trying to find something that Godfrey had, and now we found this key, of course, that is somehow related to that. It's all kind of, I guess the point is it's supposed to hook you in and make you ask questions, but for me personally, I don't really feel that curious to figure out where it's all going.
Well, it looks like they're setting up Nogaret to be an adversary.
Right. I think
rather than and he's connected with that in some way or another. We don't know how, but I mean, it's looking pretty obvious to me that instead of the strong ally and defender or whatever, he's being set up to be the the adversary.
Well, I think that was pretty obvious right from the get-go.
Yeah, but I mean, it became more obvious tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The whole thing. I did kind of laugh at the whole. Templars were known to swallow things, and I was like, man, 15 years. That's a long time to have that. That's wow.
Wait, is that when he was supposed to have swallowed that 15 years ago?
They kind of didn't. They didn't really say, but they did sort of allude to, like, oh, when Templars in the Holy Land, when they were in danger, they would swallow things for safekeeping. I was like, wait.
Actually, it was the Chronicles say that it was the Saracens that did that. Like during the First Crusade, when the Crusaders would be conquering a city, like the local Muslims would swallow their gold, and then later the Crusaders would cut them open to find it. Or something.
Well, and of course that was one of the things that Urban II brought up at Claremont about the Saracens cutting open Christians.
Okay, yeah, there's that.
Find
too.
the same, find God.
Yeah, I don't know. I just laughed because it almost made it sound like, ever since Acre, this dude's had this key in his stomach, and I'm like, damn, that's a long time to have something in your stomach. But yeah, no, I think overall, yes, it is. They are obviously saying the thing that keeps jumping out at me is, what is it with the Grail with everybody? Like, seriously, it's like, everybody's like losing their minds over the Grail, and it's like in the real medieval hierarchy of relics, the Grail wasn't that big of a deal. Like, it wasn't. I mean, it would have been important for sure, but it wasn't the relic. Like, the relic, as far as anybody was concerned in Western Christendom and Eastern Christendom as well, was the True Cross, and there were fragments of that all over the place.
And I think
even by 1306.
Yeah, and I think the Grail is kind of this motivating factor is not really coming across that strong. Like, everybody acts all excited about it. Like, Pope Boniface is like, one of his lines is, "Oh, well, we'll find the Grail and then we'll get our big crusade going." And it's kind of like, okay, it's almost like, that reminds me of the underwear gnomes. Like,
it's
step one.
It's a magical or power. I mean, it's in some way going to spark a new crusade. I mean, it has some type of supernatural power. That's what they're implying, I think.
Okay, but
it almost kind of smacks of like the somewhat apocryphal myth that during the Second World War or during the Napoleonic period, Napoleon was desperate to find the Holy Lance, because he was going to use it as like he was going to use it as this figurehead with his conquest of Europe. And there are other apocryphal legends about Adolf Hitler during the Second World War, trying to find the Holy Lance, and stuff like that. So it's obviously playing off of sort of the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, kind of thing, where it's like, oh, there's this relic and it's got this mystical power so that to like lead our armies, and it's like, no, that's not how any of that works. Like, that's the closest there ever was back then would have been the True Cross that was in Jerusalem, and even that was remarkably muted, because already, but like I said, by that point, by 1306, there were pieces of the True Cross everywhere. Like, they were all over the place. Then, so it's funny to watch this sort of postmodern attitude towards the cult of relics from the medieval period. It's like I think it's too influenced by current fantasy genres and stuff like this, of mystical
Yeah.
items, and they grant you powers and all this kind of stuff. It's like, no, that's really not how people in the Middle Ages regarded relics. Like they didn't, they weren't, they didn't have this weird, idea of like, oh, if we've got this, we're invincible kind of thing. It's like, no, that's modern history being, influencing, influencing the narrative.
Well, the Holy Lance at Antioch, was, I guess, about as close as you could get. Is that right? I mean,
Yeah, man.
and not even that. I mean, even then, even when they found that lance, about half the army, including most of the nobility, were kind of like, okay, like,
yeah. Well, I mean, it was used. I mean, they were okay, but they, okay about it, but they saw its value as, something that, or motivator or an influencer for the more superstitious, less educated, rank and file men, and used it that way.
Yeah. So yeah. So I guess another character we had introduced, a historical figure, Braveheart's girlfriend, Princess Isabella of France. Braveheart's girlfriend shows up in this episode. So yeah, I mean, okay, a couple of things for me. First of all, we've got this trope that is endlessly repeated in medieval TV or shows about the Middle Ages, and that is the love marriage versus the marriage for politics. And the Queen of France, her main concern is that her daughter get to marry for love, which I don't know. I understand that this is something that kind of these creators of TV shows automatically go to, right? But it misses the opportunity to explore medieval psychology a little bit, which is just that for the medieval aristocracy, they just assumed that a marriage was going to be political, and that just wasn't even an issue. And on top of that, I think it doesn't do justice to the way that the fact that these medieval marriages, they had a type, or these marriages of the aristocracy, they had a type of bond that kind of came that sprung out of the mutual ambitions and drives of these high-ranking people, like medieval kings and queens. They were not normal people for the most part. These were people who they were creatures of power, and they were ambitious people, and especially medieval queens. Medieval queens were not your typical women. I mean, some of them were. Some of them were more like kind of motherly, and I think of like Louis IX's wife, Margaret. But like somebody like Isabella of France. I mean, this is a woman who got Edward II deposed. I mean, the she-wolf of London, isn't that what they called her or something?
The she-wolf of France. The she-wolf of France.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's just, and then on top of that, I feel like the female characters in this show are kind of just like, they're kind of these pinup girls who, they're mainly there to kind of be like sort of sexy, and like we've got we've got this thing going on with Isabella. She's like talking about, I used to kind of have fantasies about you, uncle. Like she wants to get it on with her uncle or something.
I was like, what in God's name was with that? Like that was just, not only was that creepy, it was just like disturbing. It was like, what is this? Like,
and it's pointless too. I mean,
it was
I think
pointless.
That's the Game of Thrones element they're throwing in there, right? I mean, as I've never watched Game of Thrones, I may be like the only person on the planet who hasn't actually watched that show, but as I understand it, it's like, sex. I mean, just a lot of
Well,
sex.
It would have made more sense. It would have been tied. It would have made more sense in Game of Thrones. There would have been something going on. Where here it just, made no sense whatsoever, at least to this
Yeah.
point.
And I think the whole idea of like the idea that the Queen of France could have she could sneak around enough to where she's having an affair with a Knight Templar. I mean, that in itself is just totally, we're leaving the medieval world here. I mean, the Queen of France is going to be so watched and so she's going to be always surrounded by, you know, ladies in waiting and guards, and I mean, so I don't know.
Not to mention the fact that I completely, you know, I thoroughly beat to death in the last podcast, and that was that Queen Jeanne de Navarre. This was her last year on Earth. 1306 was the year that she died. So and this was after she'd already, you know, had 3 grown sons and a daughter who, you know, was becoming a teenager who was betrothed to the Prince of Wales and all that. So yeah, it just none of it fits. It just none of it. Like it's the train of historical accuracy just went off the edge of a cliff and a fireball.
Yeah, I guess I'm just so desperate to see a show about Crusaders that I am kind of enjoying the show for some reason, despite the fact that I think there was a time in my life when the historical inaccuracies would have absolutely driven me up the wall to where I couldn't kind of get into it at all. But I don't know. I kind of like some of the fight scenes. I was kind of, you know, having fun with. I was like, yeah, this is some good action.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
you know, I mean, if you just separate it totally from, I mean, I think I don't know, I was just thinking we may end up, this whole series may be just drama criticism rather than anything to do with history. I mean, it's going that way. It's just like you all said, it's gone so far off the rails. It's really its own story now. And so
yeah, I mean, we're
more drama critics than we are, you know, acting as historians here.
Yeah. So, okay. So Paul, you said you are enjoying the story itself. What are you liking about it so far?
You know, I like the I like a lot of the casting, to be honest with you. I think they've done a good job with that. As far as the story itself, there's a lot of good archetypes there. You have Landry, who's the one with greatness thrust upon him, so to speak, when Pope Boniface VIII basically says, "Oh yeah, by the way, I know that you're a monastic order, and yeah, we've had the Cluniac reforms and all, and you're supposed to be able to elect your own leaders and everything like that. But I'm just going to appoint somebody, and oh yeah, it's going to be the main character." And yes, that's going to cause some drama with the other 2 major Templar figures. You know, you have Tancred and you have Gawain there, and Gawain is like, hey, I regret ever saving your life, and then Tancred's like, yeah, okay, you know, yeah, you kind of suck, and I thought I was going to be the next one, but all right, fine, you know, no big deal. But I really like just, you know, the twists and turns. I mean, I've seen Game of Thrones. I've read the books. I mean, I'm certainly not up on Game of Thrones at all. I kind of stopped watching after the 2nd season, but you know, there's other shows out there like Borgia, Faith and Fear. I like the one without Jeremy Irons. You know, The Tudors. I like a good political drama that's set against a historical backdrop, even though I'm sitting there saying, nope, 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 nope. You know, there's a little Rand in my mind that's saying, nope, that's wrong. Nope, that's wrong. But, you know, for a well done plot with some good acting, I can kind of set that aside and say, I'm just going to enjoy the story. And it's like being a kid again. So, you know, one of the things that I think kind of struck me about this is, I don't know if anybody else has seen, like, you know, a movie rendition of the book Ivanhoe. You know, Ivanhoe in Ivanhoe of Rutherford, I think is Rutherford or something like that. Or no, Wilfred of Ivanhoe. I'm sorry, is the main character in that book, and you know, he's just like the essential knight in shining armor. Never does anything wrong. Defends the weak. You know, I mean, he is everything a knight is supposed to be by the chivalric code, and you know, so it's nice to see that sort of positive outlook on the Knights Templar. Like they're not jerks. They're not, they're not Guy de Lusignan in Kingdom of Heaven. They're not, the popes are not, schemingly evil. I mean, so it's nice to see it, and I'm kind of enjoying that aspect to it. The positivism of the Christian side of things.
Yeah, I will say, and I said it last week as well, and I will agree with Paul here that it is refreshing to see figures like the Pope, like the medieval popes, like the Templars, not get drugged through the mud with this postmodern, just this inherent disrespect that postmoderns seem to be addicted to, and the popes aren't, lecherous, scheming, fiends who are hypocrites, at the same time, and the Templars aren't these, foaming at the mouth fanatics, that they're too often portrayed to be, and things like that. It is nice to see, and there's even just some little things. There's little things like, little expressions of piety, and things like that that are portrayed sincerely. That's. It's almost
Like this,
at least in past experience, that was unheard of. Like, in modern cinema, it was always, if any religious figure was in it, they were either a judgmental, monster, or they were just a lecherous hypocrite. It was like there was no good guy ever. So that is nice, and I will agree with Paul that it is nice to finally see that. I just could they just have done a little bit more research, like just a little bit.
Yeah, that's one thing I've kind of always thought is, the medieval Catholic world is almost like, I mean, it kind of is as close to a real life sort of Lord of the Rings, or any kind of like epic fantasy thing. It's as close to that in real life as you can get, and the clergy are kind of the medieval clergy are almost like wizards, I mean, they kind of occupy that position. If you are to compare it to these fantasy worlds that people kind of get excited about, and I've always thought that would be fertile ground for storytelling if there wasn't this extreme bias, in the media. Like you guys were saying, like I was actually just watching this old movie from the 90s the other night called The Conquest of Paradise, about Columbus, and it's the typical thing. It's like the church is just this evil, But yeah, I'm not getting that from this show, and that was my big thing that I was cringing about leading up to us watching it and reviewing. Is I thought, oh man, this is going to be just like a hate fest on Christianity, and it's going to drive me nuts. And if that was there, I wouldn't be able to handle it. Yeah, I'd be like, I'd be hating it. But the fact that it is kind of like, the faith of the Templars, we're kind of showing it in a positive way. And Pope Boniface, yeah, he's a political actor. He's got political ambitions, but he's kind of he's an admirable figure in a lot of ways. He's kind of like, I was comparing him to Gandalf. He's almost a Gandalf like figure in this show. So that is kind of making it to where I can kind of enjoy it. So I hear what you guys are saying there. Definitely. And so I guess just
I did.
Oh yeah, go ahead,
I did have a question real quick for Paul, actually. Paul, did you by any chance was there anything that you noticed with the kind of like the the ritual of the Pope naming Landry as the master of the Paris Temple and things like that? They did a couple of things in there that it sounded familiar from what I remember of Templar ceremonies and things like that. But was there any detail in that you noticed that was historically sound, or was it pretty much just made up?
It's interesting because a lot of the and this is something that comes up in their trial and their downfall. A lot of the Templar orders internal rites and things like that, like when they were creating new knights and when they were elevating them to various positions. A lot of them were very secret. And that was actually something that played into their downfall because they were secret, there were no witnesses. This was not something that happened out in the open.
Mhm.
And so the only people who could really testify to what they were actual Templars. And when, of course, they stand accused in trial, there is the taint of, they're being accused. And, in the trial itself, there were actually accusers who were former Templars, who got into, very barely into the Templars, and they were just making up wild stories in large part. I mean, the historical record is pretty clear that these folks were, disgruntled ex-Templars who had not really gone through the whole
Mhm.
process of ascending the ranks. But so I mean, the whole thing was just so fast. I was like, oh my gosh! I was like, they didn't have an election. There was no nothing other than hand me your sword and I name you the new commander
Yeah.
of Paris. So I think it was all just flat out made up. But and I think they did it in as expeditiously a way as possible by just having the Pope walk in and say, "Oh, I claim papal privilege." About the only thing.
Dramatic expediency.
Yeah,
What
it
it
really
was.
was. It was dramatic expedience. The only thing that I will say is that at least they had the thought of putting in the papal privilege, because the Templars did answer to the Pope, which is
Mhm.
why when Clement V, tells them to jump, they say how high. Um, you know, but at the same time, the monastic orders, after the Cluniac reforms and after the investiture controversy, in the 11th, these problems in the 11th century, the Cluniac reforms. I mean, that's the essence of the monastic life. Is we answer to the Pope, but we are sort of off to the side and independent of the Pope, and the Pope
Mhm.
respects that independence. So I mean, like, the idea was that these monastic military orders, the Templars, the Hospitallers, which I'm surprised that the Hospitallers haven't shown up really yet, and they didn't really show up at all in this episode. I mean, sitting here and I'm like, all right, well, there is another order out there, and they're just as powerful and just as large and just as widespread as the
Mhm.
Templars in France. But they would have elected their own officials. They would not have simply stood back for the Pope saying, "Oh, you're going to be the next leader of the Templars." So I think they did it as best they could with the dramatic expediency aspect, but otherwise, I think that's
The,
all it
the
was.
other, yeah, the other detail that I really wanted to ask you about was there's this very brief moment where de Nogaret is talking to King Philip, and he talks about he lists this laundry list of in the past 100 years the Templars have overthrown what was it the kings of Portugal, Cyprus, and Germany, and I was just like,
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
what?
what?
yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
Can you imagine
no.
What? Who are they
the,
even
the Holy
talking
Roman Emperor?
about? Like,
I guess like King of Cyprus. What are they talking about? The Third Crusade or something? Or like,
which, yeah,
'cause that
that
didn't
was
happen.
Richard the First. That was, yeah, and he wasn't a king either. Like, he was this kind of Byzantine
Dude.
robber baron.
Yeah,
Um, it was like I was just like, what in the
yeah.
hell are they talking about?
That
Like,
was out there. Okay, but before I forget, one of my favorite parts in the show was Pope Boniface is sitting there and he's looking at a picture and he goes, Siege of Damascus. And I was like, yes, something that actually involved the Templars. Like,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. It's like at one point, Pope Boniface VIII almost tries to do history in the show. It's like he's giving a hint to the makers of the show. But anyway, so yeah, some good comments, guys. So we had a couple little questions here. All right. We kind of already answered one of these. How much authority did the Pope really have over the Templars? Can the Pope order them to kill heretics or against Christian kings? Paul, Rand, you guys already kind of answered that, but I guess, in fact, yeah, Rand, you pretty much answered that, didn't you?
Well, one thing to remember is that the Templars, and this was actually something that many people have commented on who've studied the trials and the downfall within France was many of a lot of the lawyers on the French side tried to make the case that the Templars were that because of their independence they were subversive and they were kind of this subversive threat to French royal power and all this kind of thing. And really, that was a very disingenuous accusation because the Templars actually throughout their history, and Paul, you can you can chime in on this as well. The Templars, for the most part, steered very clear of secular leadership within the countries that they were in. They did not really get involved in the doings of secular rulers within Christendom.
And they would not get involved in conflicts between.
No,
right.
no, and not at all. And they wouldn't take sides. They wouldn't, nothing like that. Their independence also sort of prevented, sort of barred them from to use a Game of Thrones analogy for people to know, sort of like the Night's Watch, where they take oaths, that we wear no crowns, we bear no, so it was kind of an arrangement like that, where hey, our job is to protect Christendom and pilgrims and the holy sites, and that's it. Like we don't get involved in petty politics back in Christendom. We just don't do that. Now, the Templars did interact with them significantly in terms of financial matters. When as they acquired their vast banking assets and things like that, Templars the Templars in Europe basically became the bankers to just about anybody who was an anybody. Back then. So so there was interaction, but it was never it was almost never partisan.
Yeah. A little trivia here, like on that note, Rand, on the banking thing, the Templars' financial management actually kind of saved the Kingdom of Aragon after the untimely death of Pedro II, because Pedro II was kind of was not a very good manager of finances, and when he died, all of a sudden the kingdom was kind of in financial chaos. But the Templars actually, because of their sound handling of the kingdom's finance, were able to prevent total catastrophe. So that's kind of just a little like indication of really how good they were at this. And there's a reason why everybody trusted them with their money. So
well, to include King Philip IV,
yes,
who later turned on them and destroyed them. In fact, the Templars financially saved his skin on a couple of occasions during his reign. So So, but in terms of like the Templars like overthrowing secular rulers in Europe, no, that is complete fiction. That never happened, and nothing of the kind ever happened. During their existence.
Yeah, and in fact, in Spain and in Portugal, there's actually an order that miraculously wears a red cross on a white background, and it starts in 1319, just 7 years after the suppression of the Templars. It's called the Order of Christ, and it was founded basically at the petition of the Portuguese king, because the Templars were such great allies with the Portuguese, as they were with the Spanish. There's another order or two that come out of Spain shortly after the Templars fall. Essentially, they're just reconstituted under this new order that is created in Spain and in the various kingdoms of Spain and Portugal, because the Reconquista is still ongoing, and these guys are pretty darn good at fighting the Moors and winning battles. So, when they're found guilty in France, and this is something that's very important to remember, they're found innocent literally every other country
everywhere
that
else,
puts them on trial. only France finds them guilty, but because the Pope was French and the Pope was living in France at the time, and Boniface VIII had died a very, very miserable death after being beaten at essentially Philip IV's orders. It didn't quite go as well as Clement V had hoped. But as Rand said, the Templars stayed out of politics, secular politics. They were bankers. They were France's biggest creditors. And some mention of that was made very, very early on. When I was watching episode 2, I can't remember if it was part of the previews from like the last episode or whatever. I think it was from episode 1. And it was, the king was talking to de Nogaret and saying, look, it's not the Templars' job to put coins in the treasury of France. It's your job. And that's kind of making, an allusion to that fact that, the Templars were the financial backbone of the Christian world. They were issuing letters of credit to pilgrims, and they certainly had, they also certainly had a detachment from the secular world. I mean, they took vows of chastity, poverty, obedience, the whole works, just like any monk would. And and here they were as financial masters applying their skills to support the Christian world. And when Philip IV, this larger than life, very ambitious figure, as we've said, is trying to create his kingdom and really consolidate power, he has to get rid of the biggest threats to his power. He gets rid of the biggest threat across La Manche. He marries his daughter off to the English prince, English Edward II, and says, okay, here you go. There's peace with England. All right, now I don't have to worry about an English army invading anytime soon. Well, who's next on the list? Well, it's this order that happens to be my largest creditor, and oh, by the way, they own a whole butt ton of castles in southern France, which has always been a contentious and problematic region. And if I take them out, and I can manage to do this, I can reestablish, crown authority over all of France, and I can essentially wipe out all of their debt that I owe them, because if the creditor is no longer there, the debt is canceled. So, that's really a big motivation for him. They kind of allude to it, and I'm hoping that kind of comes up a little bit more so that we see that sort of financial motivation come to the fore, because I think that's something that gets often understated in a lot of these things, and people start, even professional historians have done this. Like, there's a biographer, I can't remember, it's Joseph Morris, I want to say, or something like that. I know the first name is Joseph. He's a biographer of Philip IV, and he actually posits the idea that Philip IV was just so pious and righteous that he was disturbed by the rumors that he heard of the Knights Templar and had to move against them for the sake of Christendom.
I am shocked. I am shocked to discover there's gambling going on here.
Exactly. Take my chips around back, but I'm shocked to learn that the gambling is going on in this establishment.
It's like his piety didn't stop him from completely usurping the institution of the papacy, and I mean basically establishing a faux papacy. So that's crazy. I mean, I think it's everything about Philip IV's reign. I mean, basically he was trying to get control of all the kingdoms in Europe. Like, he tried to get his relatives crowned as like he tried to marry all his relatives to all the heirs, and tried to get his relatives in positions of
his brother Charles de Valois, throughout to the end of his life, held the title of Emperor of Constantinople, even though he'd never set foot in Constantinople a day in his life. He did everything he could to establish French hegemony over over basically all of Christendom, and that was absolutely his goal. His goal. He was sort of the first French king, although some might argue that that Philip Augustus, Philip II, kind of started this, but Philip IV really was kind of the first French king to really push for the centralization of French royal power, as sort of one, sort of over the entire nation. He began the process that would eventually end with people like Louis the 14th and Louis the 16th, and whatnot, of this this idea of the French nation, kind of thing. So and it really was kind of a with the dissolution of the Templars and the kind of the end of the crusading fervor, that France had been so well known for, and the usurpation of the papacy, and moving it to Avignon. It really was kind of this sort of loss of innocence moment for medieval Christendom. It really was a very sad. You definitely notice a trend, pretty much after that point, that medieval Christendom is kind of never the same again, and there is a sort of loss of innocence, and afterwards comes all these calamities, the beginning of the 100 Years' War in the 1330s, and just the incredible violence that brings to Christendom, the Black Death in 1347, the social upheaval that takes place all throughout the 14th century. You kind of see, whether it was actually caused, whether any of those things were actually caused by that, or whether they were just coincidental. But it is kind of the beginning of a loss of innocence with medieval Christendom, and never again do you see the Christendom of 1095, and things like that. You don't ever really see that again after that.
Yeah. So some good comments from everybody. I think we're kind of coming to the end at this point. I just want to get some final thoughts from each of you. Who's got final thoughts? Final thoughts.
Well, I'll say that the plot line with the young man whose wife was killed, just strictly dramatically, is it's becoming more convincing and less awkward to me.
Okay, fair enough. And yeah, that whole sequence where Landry and I guess his name is Percival,
yeah, Percival,
are kind of going around, sort of taking out the bad guys. I thought that was kind of a fun.
That was pretty cool.
It's fun, yeah. And the part where the Templars are all kind of lined up, kind of, all right, let's take these guys out. It's fun, But again, it's kind of like, am I really watching something that really has anything at all to do with the Templar? I don't know, but it's fun. I'll just say that. I'm not going to get into a big thing, but
it just didn't seem as awkward to me as it did in the first episode. I mean, it seems to be becoming more. One thing I noticed at the first was an elder Templar talking to a young boy and calling him Landry.
Yeah, that was a flashback, I think. That was Godfrey and Landry.
But then the Templars didn't take young men or young boys in and train them. I mean, they had to be adults, or at least well on the way. Isn't that correct?
You mean the Templars didn't have Padawans?
Yeah, right. I mean, it just struck me strange. I mean, I was thinking, is this his father or what? Because the Templars did not take, they didn't take young. I mean, noble families didn't send.
Yeah, you had to be an adult,
like they did the monasteries. You know what I mean? Yeah, it just was kind of a little off there. It was like, yeah, okay, this young boy has been sent to the Templars to, to train as a young boy, which, didn't happen.
Yeah, I think normally you had to kind of already be a knight to actually,
or at least an adult. I mean, if you want, if you were a sergeant, I mean,
yeah.
If you weren't,
Paul, what's the expert take on that?
Yeah, the expert take is they don't take kids, because you had to be of age. You had to be of age. I mean, taking on the vows, that's the holy orders. That is what it is. Holy orders, I mean, exists for both the secular and the regular clergy. The secular clergy, of course, being the priests and people that deal with the secular world, and the regular clergy, going back to the Latin regula, living their life by a rule. The Templars lived their life by a rule, and they took in only adults, because they had to know the vows that they were taking on. Now the only way, and this is kind of, the only thing that I could think of, and I would have to research it more. The only way that I could see them taking on somebody like this was, if it was like a family friend or something like that, where the Templars were like, training this, young boy up in as a squire or as a page or something like that. I could see them doing that, like the commander having a page or a squire, and somebody saying, okay, I'm going to send you off with this person, because as much as the Templars were, these as much as the Templars were monastic, monastic and warrior both, they were still warrior. So they did have those ties, and even though they forswore property and marriage and lineage and things like that, they would certainly have friends among the secular nobility. They didn't suddenly stop being the son of so and so, related, the cousin of so and so. So, but they wouldn't have taken a kid on unless there was some sort of extenuating circumstance like that. And maybe that's what they're trying to go for, is Landry is really special, so he was an exception. That's why he's the Grand Master's chosen, and the Grand Master treats him like father and son. And I think that's what they're going for him for a story perspective. But it was undermined a little bit, actually, when later on in the episode, after Gawain's knee comes up as a real problem, and Landry basically benches the best swordsman in the entire order, and says, hey, no, you're gonna train all the newbies, and he's like, what, you want me to train children? No, I mean, you wouldn't have trained children. I mean, the way he said it kind of made it sound like they do all take in kids and raise them up.
Yeah,
and that undermined,
like the Jedi Academy.
Yeah. No, it really did. It made him sound like they do take on
younglings
like that. Yeah.
There was one. Okay, so actually, James the First of Aragon, I think, was one of those unusual cases that you're talking about, Paul, because he actually was raised in a Templar house, because after his father died at the Battle of Muret, Pedro II died. He ended up in the custody of Simon of Montfort, and the Pope arranged a thing where the Templars took him, and so he actually spent his earliest years with the Templars. So, but of course, we're talking about the heir to the crown of Aragon, who pretty much they were entrusted with this special task of, protecting this heir,
this young, yeah, exactly, and not only that, but it took papal dispensation and machinations to make it work. As you pointed out, this is not something where
it was not typical.
It's not the Templar babysitters, they made their
Or
money, they made their wealth off of banking, not babysitting.
Yeah, or they weren't, they weren't, they weren't just going out and like rounding up street urchins, to as new recruits, and training them from childhood. Like that's not the, yeah, you're right. I mean, the men who joined the Templar Order were, for the most part, they were grown men. They were, the ones who joined to be full brothers, usually were either knights or from knightly families. and things like that. It was not, they didn't. This wasn't the Jedi. This wasn't the medieval Jedi Academy where they've got.
That's the impression the scene gave that the the Templar. I mean that they were because the
Hogwarts or
regular regular monastic orders. Yeah, noble families would send very young sons to be trained up as monks and to go up for high positions in the church and so on. But the Templars didn't do that.
No, and those orders could afford to do that because the Templar they didn't have the same kind of mission that the Templars had. The Templars were at the end of the day they were a fighting order, and kids are not. There's no place for children in that. There's no place for children in an organization with a mission like that.
Now Percival coming in and whether he becomes a knight or now that's much more believable because he's probably 20 or 18, but
yeah, Percival is clearly of the age of majority, and I kind of liked the take this guy in who's essentially his family life and his farm life is pretty much over, and what he did could potentially in some odd respect be looked down upon by some legal authority. I mean he certainly seems to think so I wouldn't put it beyond the rational belief of some odd lawyer, but I think that I think they set that up very well, and I think that Percival coming in was a very, very good sort of it, and you saw it almost foreshadowed even before Landry said, let's why don't you join the order or whatever, what have you, because when he finds Percival, he picks up Godfrey's tunic. The Templar tunic, and there he is walking out with Percival. So it's like in the one hand he's got this dead Templar's cross, and in the other hand he's got the scruff of Percival's neck as he's as they're both walking out of the abbey together. So I think that that was a real a much better moment to show the beginning of a new Templar, bringing in an adult who perhaps had nowhere else to go that could take those vows on and would take them seriously.
And Percival has a pretty heavy axe to grind. I mean, he's ready.
Yeah, he's definitely
resident edgelord.
He's one character with very clear motivation.
yeah, he's edgy, all right.
He's like the alt-right of the Templar.
Taking in the first alt-righter.
Oh God!
Make the Templars great again.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we've done some good commentary here tonight, guys. Does anybody have any final comments? I don't want to cut anybody off here, so going once. Going twice. Deus Volt. Okay, that's it. So yeah, some good discussion tonight. I think we have covered episode 2 pretty effectively. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna do this next week. I don't know, Rand, are you even gonna be with us? Are you done?
Yeah, I'm after this episode. I'm pretty much done.
Okay.
So, Paul can gladly take my place. I will gladly relinquish my place to him on this. He seems a far kinder, more forgiving, more good-natured soul towards the show than I am. So my attitude is. My attitude was pretty much negative right from the get-go, and it has not gotten better. So, yeah.
I think everybody loves hearing you.
Listening in.
I think everybody loves hearing you hate on this show, though, Rand.
Yeah, really, Rand.
There is definitely a place for that, because I mean, there's at least 3 of us that are, coming out with positive comments, and I'm trying to kind of be neutral, and then there's you on the other side. So you are playing devil's advocate
You're
here.
playing the edge.
I mean, if I need to just continue being that guy who just continues kicking this show in the face, then I guess I can bear that cross. So.
Well, and I'm going to kind of feel out the Real Crusades history community and see if everybody's even still wanting us to keep doing this with each episode. I mean, if the show like kind of really starts going downhill and nobody cares anymore, then maybe we'll end this thing at that point. But we'll kind of see what everybody's.
Well, I've gotten seen a few comments on our various pages. Like you guys are being too hard on this.
I think everybody's listening to Rand.
Yeah. I mean, I'm cool with it. I can watch it. I'm enjoying it, actually.
Yeah, it's I've already told my opinions on it. So, but yeah. Anyway, we're going to do this next week. So Rand may or may not be with us. Scott, I know you'll be there. And Paul, you're certainly invited back if you're going to be free next Thursday. So.
Yep, I will be here.
Oh, cool, great. I think Peter's coming back too for next week too.
Okay,
so.
that'll give us 4 then.
Good.
Cool. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end it for now. Thanks to everybody for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.
Can be restored. But what penance could ever cleanse the Christian blood that stains this soul?